for staying so late, but you're not going to be disappointed. Now, we have Erica Rex, who some of you may know has written a remarkable article in Scientific American, and she's going to tell us about what it's actually like to be a subject in one of these studies.
Thank you for waiting, everybody. I'm a cancer patient. I took part in a controlled clinical trial for cancer patients with illness-related anxiety at John Hopkins University. That's the one run by Roland Griffith in Maryland in 2012. I was diagnosed with mucinous colloid adenocarcinoma of the breast in 2009. I was living in New York. I underwent a lumpectomy followed by 8 weeks of radiation. Despite considerable pressure from a statistics adult medical oncologist, I declined chemotherapy. My health insurance plan was running out at the end of August, and I wouldn't be able to obtain new health insurance in the US. So in September of 2009, I moved to the UK with an Englishman I had been seeing a very short time. I started on tamoxifen through the local GP in the Northwest where I lived. I stopped tamoxifen after 4 months and went on to Arimidex, which was a nightmare. Although I like to exercise and I used to run, the condition of my joints deteriorated such that within a month of starting Arimidex, I could barely walk down the stairs. My mood plummeted. Aromatase inhibitors and I were not made for each other. By mid-2010, I was trying to figure out why I thought I should have survived in the first place. My English partner wasn't coping with aromatase inhibitors either, so soon we parted, and I moved to London. In 2011, last year in 2012, I started writing an article based on Robin's research with his fMRI studies with psilocybin. And gradually, through the course of that experience, learned about the Hopkins trial. So I applied. I traveled to Baltimore twice, once in May and once in June. The first part of the experience is the workup, which is a tryout to see if you're going to be able to be a candidate for the study. There are lots of criteria, including a thorough physical exam, batteries of profiling questionnaires, psychological interviews. Everyone was worked up by at least 4 psychologists and psychiatrists. By the end of the third day of all of this, what I have taken to calling drawing and quartering, I told Roland that if I felt as badly by the end of the next day as I did that day, I was going to go home, that I was going to eliminate myself. And actually, following that, I began spending time with the person who became my guide, Fred Reinhold. And then it changed. The whole tenor of the experience changed. The session day, when it arrives, is you're brought into a room which is decorated somewhat like the room that Charlie has at UCLA. It's a lounge made into a lounge. There's a sofa, there are pictures, books of photographs of the natural world, lots of mushroom imagery. Subjects bring lots of photos and memorabilia. We're asked to bring them along. I brought a lot of photos of my younger sister who died in 2005 and pictures from my former life in California. The actual administration of the psilocybin capsule is done very ritually, in part to make sure that the protocol is being followed and as part of the set and setting equation. Roland came into the session room to give me the dose and then watched to make sure that I drank the whole cup of water. Then I sat on the sofa and talked to Fred and the assistant and went through some of my photos. Fred suggested I look at a few pictures in one of the books. When I began to feel that something was happening, I lay down, put on the headphones and the eye shade. So the 2 sessions I had in May and June were very different. I had psilocybin doses in both sessions. I had a low dose and a high dose. Both had a lot of visual and emotional content. The June experience was much more intense, and I had a much much greater sense of going somewhere else or being somewhere else for a long period of time. Results. What matters to me through all of this is what happened in the years since my psilocybin sessions. For one thing, I'm able to focus more. Before my psilocybin experience, I could not concentrate. I couldn't focus my mind enough to read a book. Before my cancer diagnosis, I read 2 or 3 books a month, but since then my mind would wander and I'd become easily distracted. After my cancer diagnosis, I couldn't shake obsessive thoughts about what was going to happen, in the next 10 minutes or the future, and I'd wake up at night worrying. Since the sessions, I have to say that the obsessive thinking is gone. It didn't happen overnight, but in the course of 6 months, gone away. So the other aspect of that is that I can actually think about the future in a constructive way. For a long time after my cancer diagnosis, the future was confined to about the next hour. I couldn't really imagine life beyond the next day or the next year. I now actually have plans, which is shocking to me. I'm planning to learn French, and I actually have fairly steady ongoing work. I made it through my 4-year mammogram in April, and at this point I'm cancer-free. I wrote, as a result of this, what ended up being a sort of, how shall I say it, a synergistic article about both the research and my experience, which is in this month's Scientific American Mind. So you can either, if you want to read it, you can get it on the newsstand, or you can go online. They've put it in front of the paywall, so they put it on their Facebook page. So if you go to facebook.com/Scientific American Mind, it's there, and it'll be free and downloadable or readable for the next few days. Robin asked me to read the first few paragraphs of the opening. I was lying on a lumpy off-white sofa under a mountain of blankets, wearing an eye mask and listening to a Brahms symphony playing through my headphones. The notes of a violin solo lit 3 strands of deep red light, which trickled like water in my right visual field. Deeper tones poured from above in huge blue clouds in the middle distance. Another violin flourish turned the sky yellow and brought with it a comet's tail of body parts, flying from the upper left of my visual field to the lower right, disappearing behind me. So that's all I'm going to read. I don't want to bore anybody. So, questions?
Would you take it again?
So the question was, would she take it again?
The thing that can't be stressed enough, and Charlie certainly stressed it, is that in order for hallucinogenics, I think, to be therapeutic, is that set and setting has to be honored. It's got to be honored, it's got to be done right, and I would only take them again, and I would take them again in the right set and setting.
I was wondering, maybe for those people who might be less disciplined, or just maybe have some less respect to that setting, and then what would be your advice to try and advocate this honour the setting, and that it has to be disciplined? Because it might be quite tempting, they go back and say, yeah, it's going to help me, so let's take it more.
I would say that you absolutely should have the assistance of an experienced guide, someone who's been in situations with people taking hallucinogenics, and just abide by all the same rules that, and I'm sure you can find them out by either reading or talking to people who've done the research, who've done the studies.
What kind of relationship did you have with your guide before the dosing in relation to self-disclosure of himself to you, or what kinds of...
It was a psychotherapeutic drawing and quartering. By the 3rd day, with all of the psychiatrists, and certainly he among them. But then he was the person I had the longest then conversations with in the end. There was no stone unturned. But he, if I asked him questions, he would answer them as directly as possible, given, if I asked him, for instance, directly, have you taken hallucinogenics, he couldn't answer that question directly, even though I could surmise. But, within what was appropriate for the science being done, I could ask.
It seemed that you were inferring that there was a sort of a trust in the scientific intention of what was trying to be achieved, that there was a sort of joint mission, if you like, in yourself trying to find some self-sense of well-being, and that you were also contributing to the kind of furtherment of a kind of scientific study. Does that sort of boil down to a general sense of unity between yourself and your guide?
Well, from what I understand, and I don't know how it was with the UCLA study, but I know for this study, they probably turn away 70% of people who actually, write to them or phone them up and say, could I volunteer? Either through an initial briefing or after you get there the first time, and I think that the people who remain, once again, it's a self-selection in a way, the people who remain are the people who understand that yes, they're going to benefit, but that's almost orthogonal. That part of what has to happen is that they are doing science. So 6 hours later, you're sort of coming to, and these hellacious questionnaires, umpteen pages of them that are so badly written you can't stop counting. You're sitting there counting double negatives. You must be joking, Fred. Now let's see, I've counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Where are we? Was I supposed to say yes or no to that question? You are doing science in the end, and some of it's very annoying, but you have to do it.
So trust is paramount.
Trust is paramount.
In terms of setting, I think we can be a little less cautious about setting to some extent. If the pertinent question would seem to be, are you experienced? If you're experienced, you can cope with situations that are, when it goes pear-shaped, for want of a better word. I'm diagnosed bipolar, and I've utilised psychedelics on a day where I was convinced I was going to kill myself. I had everything set up to do it. I thought, before I do this, I'll have a little think about this properly, with tools that I know that I've utilised successfully before, and came out, so that's a very bad position to be starting out a psychedelic experience from. I can tell you that it absolutely turned that around. I came out of that with an absolute connection to my life and a will to live again. You can go into, it doesn't have to be that controlled. You have to have your intention really sorted, but the parameters don't need to be rigorously controlled as that.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that.
Oh, well, at least for these studies, or at least for Roland's study, people have to be naive. You could not ever have tried a hallucinogenic ever before in your life. So I'm sure for other studies, they may have a different set of parameters.
It seems that the studies exclude people with psychiatric histories. These substances, I don't use psychedelics very often, but I do tend to use cannabidiol-rich material in a vaporizer very often, and I tend to find that displays massive efficacy, especially in dealing with panic. You can shut it off like that, far quicker than any of the anxiolytics that you get prescribed for doing this.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to also make the observation that the idea that you can use mind-altering drugs in acute psychiatry is actually developing, because there are studies going on of using ketamine, which is obviously a dissociative anesthetic, similar effects in some parts of the brain to psilocybin, and they're being used for people acutely suicidal in accident and emergency units. So it's I think that accords with your personal experience. We've heard sorry, that's Time magazine, so I must be quick. I want to say this has been one of the 5 best symposia I've ever been at, so thank you all for coming. I hope you agree.